Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Di. Thank you, everybody, for your warm welcome here. It's always difficult to start after a build-up like that, isn't it? But actually, I feel that I am coming back. Di mentioned a community. Where's she gone? Di mentioned a community, and my early career as an academic was very much embedded with EAP, as those of you, and I can see at least 10 faces around the room that I know very well. I hope they still recognise me despite the glasses and the fringe. So it's lovely to be back with the EAP community, so thank you for inviting me. I've taken as my theme today this idea of navigation because I think it helps me give some structure to this talk. And the talk will go through, in true classic style, from the general to the particular. And I'm beginning with some very, very broad thoughts about some of the significant shifts and changes in academic life. I'm going to talk about English as a world language, some futurology about where our students might come from in future, how that might change the nature of what we have to do to support them, and then conclude with a few ideas about possible implications for EAP practice and policy. I'm afraid it is slightly death by PowerPoint, but let's see how we go. Okay, so in this opening section, I want to focus on 4 exciting developments in the scholarly world. The landing of a probe on a comet, the fact that social scientists found the key to halting the spread of Ebola through ethnographic understanding of burial practices, the pushing back of our understanding of the beginnings of symbolic representation by another 400,000 years than we had evidence for before, and the amazing potential for personalised medicine, particularly in the area of targeted cures for cancer. So there are a lot of terrible things going on in the world right now, but the scholarly community that we're all part of in our small way, either directly as academics, support staff for those helping to prepare the next generation of international academics, it's still a very, very vibrant world out there, the scholarly community. And I would say it's one of the most positive phenomena that we have globally. So that's quite a bold statement to say about the field in which we work, but I believe it quite strongly. But the trends that we see flowing from globalization of international academia are also highly disruptive. And if we stand still and use out-of-date models of the landscape that our students need to navigate and the tools that they require, we will do them a disservice. So wearing my support for British education hat firmly, that's my British Council hat on, we won't be as attractive as a major global competitor system in terms of preparing and welcoming students. So I'd like to focus for a little while on the developments, the global developments, and some of the major trends that we're seeing in what we could broadly call academic writing. The first point I want to make is that academic writing is an increasingly collaborative activity. The lines that you see there, you don't have to read them in great detail, but it is extraordinary that the bottom blue line is for papers with 1,000 authors. Before I started to investigate some of this last year, I couldn't conceive that there was such a community that was drawing things together into a single publication. And you'll see the general trend there of the rise of multi-author papers. So that's the first broad trend I want to talk about. This is the same information with a different cut, the maximum number of authors on a single paper by year. It's the same kind of trend. The second phenomenon that we see in scientific and academic writing is the rise of new players. So within that phenomenon, the access to international audiences through co-authorship, generally in the medium of English, is driving some changes to the levels at which international researchers are cited. And if you take out USA, which is in the column on that side, you'll see the dramatic rise of Chinese academics as authors in this community, followed by UK, followed by Germany. And the third point in these preliminary remarks is that UK research is also international. Our doctoral students in the UK come from outside the EU, 16% come from other EU countries, and 72% of researchers in the UK were internationally mobile between 1996 and 2012. So the points I'm making here are that if we are drawing a map or having preconceptions about targets that we might set, or types of socialization that young academics need, our PhD students need, it may be a very different model from the model that it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Our ideas, our conceptions, my conceptions, I'm 53 now, I did my degree when I was, 18, 20, so our perceptions of what academia is like need to be challenged, and we need some good data to help us navigate that ourselves. The second section that I want to talk about in this sort of opening part is the rise of the phenomenon of English as the world's academic language. We all know this, but I thought again I would just frame it for you with some facts and figures to help us see this quite visibly. How else would you do something visibly? Okay. First of all, the proportion of publications by the language of publication. And I'd just like to draw out a few comments from this. Can you all see it at the back? Thank you. So taking a run at this from the 80s through to 2013, we see the rise of the proportion of publications in English from 64% to 91%. We see the Chinese language rising somewhat in terms of publications in that language. We see the proportion declining for German language and French language publications somewhat in that time. And interestingly, we see Spanish language being somewhat stable in that process, bucking that particular trend. Second point in relation to this, I'd like to introduce you to these are just some broad trends to help us perhaps frame some bigger conversations, as Di was saying, through these few days. This chart shows you the ratio of scholarly journals published in the native language or the home language versus English in country through Netherlands, Italy, Germany, France, Spain, etc. A couple of things to highlight in that is that we have, if we look at Brazil, we have an interesting phenomenon. I'm intrigued as to why we have that, again, a bucking or reversal of the general trend in comparison with the Netherlands and Italy, where there is a massive rise of scholarly activity in English if you look at the proportion of academic activity measured by scholarly journal publication in those countries. So there's some very interesting implications that we might draw from that, and I think again might help us frame some of our thinking about what is normal, what is a normal academic, what is academic language in the middle of all this. Moving on, I think another very significant trend, slightly nerve-wracking doing this without the slides in front of me, just slightly. So my next point is that I think there is a significant trend that we see globally, that more very young people can access English from a very early stage in their schooling. A little quote there from Andy Kirkpatrick about the English becoming a core course in primary schools. And those of you who've worked with Chinese students will know the the flow from their Long Dragon program of starting to teach English and the 4 skills through from a very early age through to their secondary level. And we felt that coming through as the people receiving those students. And as you again will know, you know, more than 50% of many of your pre-sessional courses and your universities will be Chinese students. So the flow from that policy change in a significant country where young people are being introduced to high quality or better quality English teaching at an early stage flows into our classrooms in the UK and the needs of our students and their levels when we test them and when we receive them here. So you're sitting here in Leicester, we're sitting here, I'm standing here in Leicester, and I am suggesting to you working in the middle of a very significant number of major trends and drivers that are shaping the skill levels and the expectations and the needs of students in quite dramatic ways at the moment, and also changing the models of what we might regard as the academic norms as well. So, and a second well-known trend is that of the rise of not only direct teaching of English in the curriculum, but also teaching subjects through the medium of English, EMI, English as a Medium of Instruction work. I've just pulled out a small snapshot there from a report that Julie Dearden did for us at British Council on sort of scanning the likely rise of EMI around the globe, and I encourage you to go to our Knowledge Centre at British Council and download that. It's a good preliminary report, I think. So you will also see there primary schools, secondary schools, universities having the ability legally and being encouraged to teach, for instance, maths or science through the medium of English in the classrooms. So that's another, the students that we receive will have potentially come from very, very different kinds of backgrounds and have different training requirements because of some of these dramatic changes that are happening globally in our large markets. And just to end that section, I thought I would do what I would never tell my students to do when I was teaching presentation skills, and I would put up something that was in something below 16-point font that you couldn't possibly read at the back or at the front, indeed. Let me direct you to some of the regular updates on tertiary level English teaching that the OECD does. It's quite an easy year-on-year or a couple of year source of information about how many university systems or tertiary systems globally are teaching in the medium of English. So you have the usual suspects at the top: Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom, the United States. All or nearly all programs offered in English. I'm interested in the nearly all, but anyway. Many programs offered in English: Denmark, Finland, Netherlands, Sweden. Some programs, and a large, about 15 countries there, and none, or 0 in there. And interestingly, if we look back, I won't go back, but if you look back at the kind of scholarly journals ratio material, you've got both Brazil and Russia, who were low in terms of scholarly activity in the medium of English and high, are both in the strand there where it says no or nearly no programs offered in English. So I think that's another phenomenon. If you have master's students who have come through a degree program that's taught in the medium of English in country, they will have very different needs potentially from someone who is coming from an undergraduate program in country in their home language. So you need to be thinking about your students' needs, sliced and diced, as they say, by these different significant changes that are happening and that I predict you will already be seeing coming through in your pre-sessional classes. Okay. I thought it would be useful for us to also start this conference with some ideas about where have our students come from traditionally, and where might they come from in future. So not only looking at what shifts are happening to them in terms of access to English and level of English, but just simple facts about where students have come from. Now, this is not going to work, I predict, she says with great enthusiasm for technology. Right. Could my lovely assistant, Chris, click on the... Okay. While Chris is doing that, what you see here is a tool that we've developed at British Council last year, which is open access. You're more than welcome to go there. If you do a Google search, and you can do it now, those of you who have your machines with you, British Council Mobility, IHE or International Higher Education, it's very likely that one of the first things you come across in our Knowledge Centre is this student mobility tool for you to play with, if you like. What you see here is the basic number of students in the UK at a given point in time. And you see groups of 250, each blob is 250 students dropping in year on year to show you the change by country and by gender of students. And you can play with this. You can move the slider yourself if there's a particular year that you're interested in. Sorry, if there's a particular year that you're interested in, you can go and find out what were the student numbers country by country for those countries coming into the UK. We also did the outflow, but as you can predict, that is a remarkably low number because it's the UK students going out into other parts of the world, which they are singularly reluctant to do. And here on the bottom right, we have key factors that might be influencing student numbers. Changes to visa policies, big scholarship programs, expansion of the EU, and so you can actually link some of these trends to socio-political facts that are going on in the outside world. So please visit our site, please play with it, give us feedback on it. We're developing more of these kinds of analytical tools for the community to have a go at a better understanding of what the map is, of some of the data that's out there. And we would very much welcome more ideas for the kinds of things that you would find helpful in this area. Okay, I better move on. I do like that, though. So good. Sorry. Right, okay. Then it gets boring again. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's a little tool to be able to look backwards. Where have our students come from in the past? And as you will know, British Council very regularly does horizon scanning work, as do many others. We work with BIS, we work with many other people on this. What are the sort of demographic factors and the other kinds of trends that we see to help us do some horizon scanning and futurology about where students might come from in future. So the first cut of this is to look at it from the perspective of macroeconomic changes. And those of you who are familiar with this report, you don't have to, it's just putting together the rise of GDP and the enrolments at tertiary level. And there is a very rough correlation. As that GDP rises, so do the tertiary enrolments in a particular country. So that's one way that we can look at this. And the other is to look at demographics. So we know the numbers of children that are born around the globe, the number of 12-year-olds who will become 18-year-olds in different parts of the world. And that also helps us understand where the bulges and the gaps will be globally in terms of students going to university. So Europe will be getting older, Japan will be getting older, and other parts of the globe will continue to have that bulge of young people coming through particularly in places like Africa. So, putting some of those things together, yeah, that's right, putting some of those things together, we predict, I mean, we can't predict the election, so how we can do 2024, I don't know really, but you know, we predict that by 2024, India, China, Indonesia and the US will be home to over 50% of the world's 18 to 22-year-olds. And this despite the fact that, as we know, there's a levelling in China. We think that India, Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria and China will dominate global higher education growth in the next decade. And this is, well, I'm not allowed to talk about visas actually, okay. And the highest growth in absolute terms in international students will come from India, Nigeria and Malaysia. So we may be right, we may be wrong, but what I'm urging you to do as people who design courses, think ahead to the next generation of students who are going to come to our shores or not come to our shores, be perhaps taught in different ways in different parts of the globe. I think there are tools and there is information out there for us to start to think out of the box a little bit about where our students are coming from, what their proficiency levels will be, and what their probable needs might be. And I don't think it's a way that we tend to think about EAP, I would say, and I will unpack that a little bit for you, if I may. Whoops, one more about the level of study, and I think there's no surprises here. Masters and and doctoral students outnumbering undergraduates in terms of international students joining, and only on the research degree program seeing a sort of near balance between home and international. Okay. What you're probably interested in is this bit, which is, what does all that mean when you put those different factors together? And I think a challenging quote for us that I found, and that I think is an interesting one for us, again, if you're going to be thinking with colleagues about the future of EAP and what it might look like, thinking about that phenomenon of English as a medium of instruction. Julie here saying, if EMI teachers slowly become more or additionally like language teachers, then is it the case that EMI will gradually replace EFL as the main vehicle for furthering English language proficiency? Question one. And what will be the role of language centres and preparatory year teachers, and what status will they have in a rapidly developing EMI context? And I think this is a really interesting question. It puts it in a rather stark way there, as if you're all going to get into a big fight with EMI and say that, that's, we want EAP to be as EAP was and we can carry on doing what we've been doing. But I think there is a provocation there that I think is a good provocation to think about if the students are being taught to a higher level in country, and if they are being prepared very well in the medium of English in country, what is the value added when they come to the UK in terms of their pre-sessional support, pre and in sessional? So being someone who has had the privilege actually of working through a number of changes and a number of phases, as I would see them, in EAP, so sort of reflecting on 20 years, 25 years actually in EAP, one way or another, I thought I'd set out a few trends for the profession as I have seen them emerge, I think. So I think we started perhaps, or I started in my career, preparing students for what felt like a more stable or a more known setting. And rather negatively, I've put that down as the deficit model. It's not meant to be that negative, it's meant to be that we kind of had a baseline of where students came in, and we felt a very clear idea of what the target was. And I think that is a model that I was certainly very familiar with. And the kind of instruments and tendencies that you saw going along with that, needs analysis, target functions and structures, and in the more broadly in terms of things like academic writing, rhetorical patterns, signposting, and quite explicit models. Now, some of you here are too young to have been teaching EAP in the 1980s, and some of you aren't. So I'll be very open to having some debate and thought about this. I think quite quickly we did begin to grip on things like critical linguistics and the agency of students. It probably flowed into our classrooms in terms of student-centered learning, autonomy, critical thinking, but there was certainly a phase, and we still have a phase, where we were wanting to help the student find their own voice, and criticality and agency was very, very important. That the student was taking responsibility for their own learning. It's that kind of agency that I'm talking about. And what I think we may see is what I'm calling an agency plus model. I think we will still always be wanting students to be autonomous and critical thinking individuals. But I think if you put that idea together with some of the previous phenomena that I've been talking about, I think we'll be much, much more dependent on peer communities and networked resources that students can find very, very quickly, and indeed EAP practitioners can find very, very quickly in a much more just-in-time kind of model. I think this will lead to things like personalised learning and personalised learning journeys. And I think the ability to deliver more of what we do through blended or through online learning or through flipped classrooms or whatever the phenomena are that are out there will actually allow that personalised learning, a little bit like the personalised medicine that we started out with, to become a reality potentially for us. Though I do remember, I've heard this before about whiteboards, and I've heard it before about MOOCs. So, we haven't quite, we never quite reached that wonderful sunny horizon that we think we're going to. But I do genuinely think the disruptive technologies out there are so disruptive at the moment, and young people are so well networked and engaged so easily with the digital environment that we have to change the way that we support them. And your Vice-Chancellor touched on it here. Paul mentioned the fact that he feels that collaboration between the EAP practitioners and the universities and the university academics is a very, very powerful combination. And it's one that I think we should be lobbying for hard. And if it's not a reality, then I think if we're talking about adding value, getting into a much closer collaboration where you're looking at multiple perspectives on your students' needs with their receiving departments has to be a good pathway for us to take. So just to finish off, so that you've got some time for questions, putting together the idea of a rise in students who have probably stronger English skills coming through. I think we should celebrate that. I think English as a tool for young people to have access to education is a fantastic thing, and we should relish the fact that more students are more easily getting access to it. School systems with better English learning outcomes is probably going to be a phenomenon. There are government-level initiatives in big countries that are pushing hard to get high-level English into the school systems, and the rise of English as a medium of instruction. So I think this will lead to quite different pre-sessional and in-sessional students coming through, with perhaps higher levels but more complex needs. And in my conclusions, I'd just like to explain that a little more. So my first concluding point is that I think the deficit model is dead. I think the native speaker, non-native speaker binary distinction is unhelpful. As you saw from my opening slides, academic staff are becoming less linguistically homogeneous. The student mix in many departments is very internationalised now. And we, as I say, are seeing potentially this lifting of proficiency. And I think for me, this challenge I've put at the final part here, which is the better prepared engineering student, the bi or trilingual international student who has been taught science in country in English, or the monolingual UK student. If you're preparing them for an engineering degree, which of those students is going to be in a better position to go immediately into a complex, multinational, multilingual environment, where the engineering is a very multilingual discipline, as we know, to engage in things like project work with people from different cultures and understand that there are different cultural perspectives there, and also to have the powerful cultural tool of being bilingual, which a number of our UK students sadly don't have, and I am ashamed to say I don't have. I am not anywhere near competent even in a second language, although I was brought up in a bilingual family. So I think there are very hard and very interesting questions. When I was working in EAP directly, I would quite regularly, every year, be asked by UK students, why can't I come and get in-sessional support? I don't know how to write an essay. I don't know how to proofread something. So I think I'm challenging us to think differently about who is the most needy in the system when we are bringing sort of preconceptions into our classes about students. Secondly, I've got 3 of these points, so I think I predict that if the phenomena that I've been talking about flow through over the next 4 or 5 years, I think you'll see students from new markets, because we've been thinking that there are different parts of the world that are probably going to have that demographic bulge, that economic bulge, if you like. They're going to reach that point where they can afford to have more tertiary level students, and a number of those will always want to study in the medium of English, and a number of them abroad. And this may lead to quite diverse and changing balances. We've lived through, or many of us have lived through, the opening up of China, and Chinese students changing from being a tiny number when I started out in our classes to the largest single language group that we teach. And I think we should be ready for perhaps a softening of that. I think more and more universities are thinking of getting that balance right, and I think you will see perhaps different needs coming through with different language types. And I've just thrown up a few there from my experience. You may have different ideas of what the needs will be, but I think we can have a much more nuanced idea of what those needs might be. And finally, to come back full circle to, where's Chris? Chris, thank you so much for that lovely opening about the lanes and the map and so on. I think that was a lovely link in, thank you. And what I'm saying today is that I think we still can predict some of the needs on the student journey. I don't think they change particularly. Maybe they do, but I don't think we can confidently and in a stable way write that map for them and say, this is what the target is, do this, write it in this fashion, and you will succeed. I think that was always an old model, but I think it's an even less useful way of thinking about things now. I do think we can still provide them with a compass or compass points, and these are my 4 that I think are important and what I've learnt over the years or would share with you. Good basic study skills, how to access and synthesize and process complex information, good time management, and truly understanding assessment requirements. What is it that I am really required to do here? I think we should be constantly trying to link language improvement to real future academic disciplines and communities, and that's where I'm hoping that we can build on that idea that we had in the opening by the Vice-Chancellor, that hand in hand as a kind of team that a university should be thinking about its international students. I think we should still be thinking of building up autonomy and confidence and questioning and agency in students, and that we are interested in them as individuals and we want them to succeed as individuals. Because as education massifies, as more and more pressures are on universities, I think it's quite easy for us to slip that golden thread, which is that we care about the students and we care about them in quite a personalised way. And I know the EAP staff in particular, it's no, I think it's no surprise that I've had a lovely welcome here and been very well looked after. And I know that that is what a lot of EAP centres are like for their students. And I think self-reflection and the ability to question others is probably a really, really powerful tool that we give students. It's not about language proficiency. It's about their ability to think and question courteously and skillfully and find their own voice as they navigate their way through it. So I thought I'd share with you that my take on both the global and my personal reflections on where I think EAP is today, and I hope it's given you a good grounding for a good few days thinking about these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I think we are going to invite you again for another BALEAP conference around 2024, so you can check if your predictions are right. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. There is a microphone, so if you'd like to ask Rebecca a couple of questions, please put your hand up and somebody's going to bring the microphone to you.
Hi, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating and enlightening. One of your points was that there will be gradual lifting of proficiency levels through English as a medium of instruction. And I wanted to connect that to the quotation you had from Justin about whether the EMI teacher is going to be the new EAP teacher. I'm in Scandinavia, and what we've seen there is that one of the implications of the rapid growth in EMI has been not a rise in proficiency levels, but that the content knowledge that many students get out of the university courses is decreasing, and the degree to which they struggle with the courses is increasing. So I wonder if you think that this gradual lifting of proficiency levels is something that's simply going to happen through EMI, through a process of incidental acquisition, or if a precondition for it is that the EMI teachers step up and become EAP teachers.
That's a good challenge, thank you. Well, thinking it through, I would say that if you put a student who's not, as it is with all our students, if you put, say, a Danish student into a tertiary course and suddenly teach them physics in English, I agree. And there's been research that they will struggle. And there's been research done to suggest that when you ask a student to do that, they perhaps miss 20% of the facts that they might have gathered otherwise. So, and as I've argued in other contexts, changing the language of tertiary level is certainly never a neutral process, and there are always pros and cons to it, I think. I think it's probably different, and you may challenge me on this, perhaps the younger learners and the use of EMI, if you're being taught the subject well, so you're getting the technical vocabulary at secondary level, linking that to then, I suppose what I'm saying is, as ever, you need to link where the student has come from. So if they're having strong EMI in their schools, then they are actually probably getting into a better place and can benefit from that EMI in their tertiary level. So it's not really an answer, but I think it's, yes, I like the question, thank you.
Ella, over here, Edward, over there, just beside you.
Hello, Edward de Chazelle from the UK. I excuse me, want to also bring up that same point on language proficiency rising. I think that needs quite a lot of unpacking because there's a lot of different regional trends. One I would mention is the CAMENA countries, Central Asia, North Africa, Middle East.
Yeah.
There's so much shift there to EMI. However, the education system lower down the food chain is struggling, particularly the state schools. So if you did go to an international school or you're a bit privileged, you're flying away.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, and that's the majority who didn't, I think levels, in my experience, are very low, sort of A2, possibly exiting at B1. So that's a real challenge in vast swathes of the world, particularly the Islamic world.
Yes, I think it's the same problem stroke issue. Possible area for solution is that you need to be looking at it more holistically. It's the same at the moment for modern language teaching for UK students. There's been amazing fragmentation between, say, primary school and secondary school in terms of second language teaching here. And that's had a dramatic impact, as we all know, on the people who are able to take up modern language degrees in the UK. So language learning, I guess I'm interested in whether the EMI phenomenon is separate from the English proficiency rising question. I think that's probably the bit I'm intrigued by. Yeah.
I think we have a moment, just one more question. Over there.
Thanks for this. Sure, the deficit model is dead. But isn't there a tension when you actually draw a parallel between this model where the learner has to be seen as an active person, an agent, etc., agency, autonomy, okay? Between this, I mean, you might draw a parallel with communicable or non-communicable diseases, but then a disease is one thing. There's no great special social aspect to it. While in language use, we have a very, strong component. I mean, language is sociability, sociality. It's a social event. And how can you actually, compare the two in a very meaningful way, especially as within agency and autonomy, you stress the individuality rather than the sociality in the language use.
Okay, that's very interesting. I like that one as well. I think I would say that I would hope that the concept of, let's take agency, would be thought through in the spirit of allowing students to have that social experience. So I also wouldn't see them as distinct from one another. I think that it's very hard, and I put at the end there, giving people the level, the skills to be able to challenge, to question politely and skillfully other people with whom they disagree or they agree or they don't understand. That to me is giving them agency. So and that allows them to be a socialized student by being able to question skillfully. So I also agree with you, I don't see them as separate. You're looking very puzzled.
Unfortunately, she'll have to sort it out later because I have to cut short our session. I'm sure you'd like to keep talking to Rebecca and asking her a number of questions, but we have to rush to our first sessions of the day that start at 3 o'clock. So before going, please, can you have, again to Rebecca, thank you very much.